Last speaker is Professor Andreas Ninck. Dr. Ninck is a professor in business development at the Bern University of Applied Science in Switzerland. He lectures on the subject of business analysis and design, systems thinking and problem solving, knowledge and innovation management, and project management. His main interests are in the design thinking, knowledge management, collaborative engineering, and e-learning. Please join me. Welcome, Dr. Ninck.
So that's my vision about action learning. Some of you may know this picture. It's in Rome, in the Vatican, and it's called the School of Athens, and it shows how philosophers, Greek philosophers, were learning and teaching. So my topic is about learning, so it's about every one of us. And so first, I would like to start with a task for you. I have here a box. It's a black box. You may not open it, but you should find out what's the object in this box. Or you should find out as much as possible information about this object in this box. So when we are learning, the question is how is information, knowledge coming into our mind? And my first question is, what's in your mind when you are thinking about Switzerland? Which mental models do you have in mind about Switzerland? So I think everyone has other mental models. Perhaps you think about this Swiss Army knife, famous Swiss Army knife, or Swiss banks, the Swiss franc, the hard currency, or perhaps Swiss chocolate, which is famous, or perhaps you think about Swiss watches. Some years ago there was an exposition, an international exposition in Spain, Sevilla, and one painter painted this picture, La Suisse n'existe pas. By the way, Switzerland has 4 official languages. We are a population of 8 million people, so that's about the population of New York City, and we have 4 official languages. That's French, it's German, it's Italian, and it's Romansh, that's a Roman language. And so Switzerland doesn't exist, and that was paid by Swiss federal money to paint this picture. So politicians, you can imagine, they said, oh, why give we this money to him to paint this? And but what he wanted to say, everyone who thinks about Switzerland has other mental models in his mind. So there is no real understanding of what is Switzerland. So I would like to start with some pictures. What are these learners? What is the activity of these learners here? You know, all this is a classical situation. So my motivation to start to think about teaching and learning was still quite big, but I have a nice family with 2 twin boys of 15 years and a girl of 17 years. And when I looked how they are learning or how they are taught in school, it's still the same as when I was in school. So I thought, how could we improve teaching and learning? And when you look at the activities, so perhaps he is hearing, he's writing, this girl is looking, but some in the back are chatting or sleeping. So that are the activities of these students. What are the activities of these students here? So they are discussing, they are creating, they are much more active in their learning. So what about the teacher? This teacher tries to bring his knowledge from his brain to all these people here. So that's a one-to-one communication relation. And it's quite hard to address all these different minds. That's another kind of teacher, it's another role. Here the teacher has the role more of a coach or of a facilitator. So he's working together with the students. What about learning material? In books, we try to make explicit the knowledge and to write it down in a sequential way and bring it to our students. That's another way of learning material. Here, my students are out in the field and trying to learn from users. They try to find out what are the needs, what are the requirements of certain users. Learning objectives could be about right or wrong answers. Or learning objectives could be about failing. When we fail, we learn much more than when we going for right or wrong answers. So I'm sending my students out. I'm forcing them to create prototypes, real models of their ideas, and to discuss them here in the group of students, but also together with possible users of their products, of their final products. So here I would like to show you what happens when we are learning. So you have an object. It could be the object in this black box. And you have first to perceive this object and you have to make a relation between this object and the mental models you have in your mind. And based on this association, you make some abstractions and you come up with new mental models. So that's an ongoing process that starts with birth and ends with your death. And that's a normal way of how you learn. So we have 3 situations here. When you have an object which is very different from what you have in your mind, then you have a big question mark in your head. You don't understand nothing and you will not learn. The other side, if you encounter something that you already know, you say, oh, I know this already, it's not interesting, then you don't learn. But the interesting situation for learning is when there's some difference between what you know and what you see and what your mental models are. So creating a good learning situation means to create a situation where there's some difference between what you know and what you encounter. So please remember this learning cycle. Now, when it comes to communication, comunicare, the Latin word means sharing. So what are we sharing when we are communicating? So we are sharing our mental models. So back and forth, we have to discuss. It's more than sending only signals and receiving signals, but it's sharing these mental models. And for this, it's important to have a sort of shared space where we can bring out these mental models, so we can visualize these mental models. And when it comes to collaboration, it's not only sharing these mental models, but it's co-creating new mental models, new ideas. And Michael Schrage from MIT, he brought this quite nice to the point when he said that images, maps, and perceptions bouncing around in people's brains must be given a form that other people's images, maps, and perceptions can shape, alter, or otherwise add value to. So it's important to have kind of, like I'm using here, pictures to explain what you mean, and you have to have this shared space where you can co-create together and create new mental models. So 5 years ago, I have had the chance to set up a new course in within our new MBA degree program, and so there were quite a lot of other MBA programs already out there. So we said, what's the difference of our new program? And we said it's not about master in business administration, but it should be more on business design or business development. So a main part in this studies is to develop new ideas, to solve problems, to design new solutions, to be innovative. And when I'm trying to teach my students some process models for solving problems or being innovative, then I'm showing them this picture. It's from MscBA, French painter. And it shows me here in Orlando with my car looking for the way. So if the people are telling me in an algorithmic way, you have to go straight ahead and then right and the left, and so after 5 minutes I will be lost. So an algorithm doesn't help me in this situation. What I'm needing is a kind of a map. So process models are rather maps who help me to find the way through a complex situation. So this could be one approach, and this is not really helpful for my students to tell them how to proceed. When we are looking for a problem-solving process, then we have to give some structure. And I imagine that all of you know this approach, which you'll find in a lot of textbooks. It's called waterfall model. It's waterfall because the water falls down and you can't go back. So when you now think about a learning process, in a learning process you have to go back and back and back. And so this is against the natural way of learning. So what we are doing is rather to go some certain step from the problem to the solution, go back against the problem, forth and back, and so try to find out what could be an adequate solution to my situation. What is also important that we have a divergent and convergent process. So first we have to diverge to understand the situation. Then again we have to converge to bring this situation to the point. again diverge to find some possible solutions, converge, diverge, converge, until we have a possible solution. You can, in complex situations, you can find the right answer, but you can find a solution that fits adequately to the situation. So a process could look in this way, so that you iterate over time towards your solution. So in this cycle, I'm trying to show you what is important with this process model. So often we start with the task of observing or exploring a situation. Then at a certain point, we come to ideation. That's more the creative part. Then we come to a more critical phase of the process, and at the end we come to a situation where we have to show to others what we have created, what we would like to communicate to others, and then we have to test this, and again. So you can imagine that we are going through this cycle several times until we have a possible solution. And so we have different levels here. It is important to change between the level of reality and the abstract level of models, and forth and back. So if we only analyze the situation, go on the level of models, then try to solve our problem on the level of models, and don't go back to test if we have a good understanding of the reality. Then you are wrong. At the end, we come up with a solution that doesn't fit to reality. But when we often switch between these two levels, then we can be quite sure to come up with a good solution. So I have entitled this a conversation with mental models. So when we are creating models and discussing models, and that's a kind of dialogue or conversation, we can do this with ourselves, we can do this with others, but all of you have encountered a situation when you are starting to write down things. That's also a conversation with your paper or with your text, and starting to make this conversation, not only writing, but try to also visualize your things. That is really helpful for your understanding. On the other side, there's the change between thinking and doing. It's important not only to be on the intellectual side, but it's also important to do things. Try it out, test it, and come back and think about this. And you have also in this circle the divergence, and the convergence is also inherent in this diagram. And what is important that you have another circle. It's a similar circle. It's this circle of reflection. So my students, at least after each production circle, they have to step back and to go on the meta level, and they have to reflect about what they have done. And so then they have not only to reflect, they have to write this down, and I force them to write kind of micro articles that are short articles, about half a page, and so they have to write a headline like in a newspaper, 3 sentences, what are the important things of this article when others are reading the article, so that they understand what's the important things in this article. And then it comes the history, the story, what they have encountered, then the most important lessons learned, and so the consequences for the future, what is important for their future doing. In my course with my MBA students, I'm working on real problems. So these problems are coming from Swiss companies. So here's some examples. And this is important for action learning, so that they don't work only for a situation. They think it is not important what is done with the results, but here you have real companies. They are writing down the challenge on 1 to 2 pages. That's the beginning of the semester. So the students can then choose out of this challenges, and then I'm grouping. They are working in groups of 5 on these challenges. So just 3 examples of results. So Swisscom, that's our Swiss telecom company. They 3 years ago they came up with Swisscom TV. So they're sending TV over copper cable, old technology combined with new technology, and so they said, how could we inform TV listeners with our other technologies like smartphones? And the students analyzed the situation and came up with this prototype of live cooking. So a person who can cook, and by cooking, listening to TV and even interacting over the headset with people. This is an interesting example. It's from Post Finance, that's a Swiss bank. They said, we have the problem that senior citizens don't like to make e-banking. And how can we convince them to make e-banking? So an important part in the process is to analyze the problem. Do we have understood the problem? Do we see the right problem? And here, one of the first tasks is to make a stakeholder analysis. So they have analyzed the different stakeholders and have seen that the bank has other requirements than the senior citizens. And they said the bank has the requirement that they would have to have a smooth process after payment, but the senior citizens, they would, and the requirement is safety and payment. And so at the end they came up with the old technologies, so that's the way we still pay the bank counter, the post counter. So they just have changed 4 of these numbers here. They were a little bit shy and said, is this really innovative what we have done? But now this is patented. And it's really innovative because we have not to brainwash the senior citizens. They can still pay in their used way, but the bank has, on the other side, at the end of the process, they have the improvement that they do e-banking, and so everyone is happy with this solution. And the third example is a nice one, because this picture on the right-hand side is only 2 weeks old, and it was in the newspapers in Switzerland. So the question was, we are a country of commuters. You have to imagine that more than 1 million people are commuting with the train in Switzerland. And so the question was from Swiss Federal Railway Systems, what can commuters do during their time in the train? And my students came up with this solution that they could order their goods and that on the left-hand side you see the locker system where you can lock your luggage. They said you could use these locker systems to put goods in. Then you have a code here, and you give in this code, and then you can get out the things you have ordered in the morning when you went to work, and you can, when you come home from working, you can get out your stuff of these lockers. So here I have shown in this direction you have a number of elements and relationships of a system. So sometimes we call this complicatedness. So the more elements and relations a system has, the more complicated it is. A computer is complicated, but the variability of behavior it is a deterministic system. I hope the computer is doing everything I want. But with people, complexity comes into the system. So if we are on this level here, so then the focus is on existing knowledge or how to improve processes. And all what we are doing here on this level more or less can be automated or can be outsourced because it's algorithmic. So you can repeat this, and when you can describe this, and then you can also automate it or you can outsource it. So business people, managers, often tend to make things more algorithmic, bringing it to this level down. But we have in the future rather to go on the upper level, because on this level here is innovation, and I have painted this blue and red. Perhaps you have heard about the blue ocean strategy. So we have the red ocean, that's the market, the saturated market, the bloody market, where everyone makes the same, and you have to fight for survival in this market. And the blue ocean is there where you would like to be, where it's nice. And so for future development in our society, we have not to try to make it simpler, but we have to find out how to handle complexity and how to manage complexity. And so when we are speaking sometimes about a change from information age to knowledge age, there are some authors who are speaking from the change from knowledge age to conceptual age, and saying in the future our students have to learn about how to think conceptual and how to solve complex problems. So I'm trying to divide between instruction and action learning. So in the first picture you have instruction, and in the second picture you have action learning. And so when we are writing this down, so it's black and white or red and blue here again, the traditional way of teaching is that we try to transfer information from one head to the other. But a new approach could be that we are constructing new knowledge, so that's a more active process. Learners are here, the empty glass to be filled, but here these are active explorers or developers of concepts. Here the teacher has the role of the sage, and here he's more the facilitator or the coach who helps in the learning process. Content broken down versus contexts, real life situations where you can learn about or where you can construct new knowledge. curricula, in the new approach, the learner has his questions and interests which are at the forefront. Here, instead of textbooks, you have life situations, primary sources, learning materials, and perhaps the most important point here, errors should be avoided. This is about right and wrong answers. But here, errors are the origin of new learning. So learning starts with errors. When you don't make errors, it's not an interesting learning situation. Only when you fail, then you have to think about why did you fail. And so what's interesting when we are evaluating this kind of course, I had never as good ratings as when I have started with action learning, and some students are writing, I have never, my learning was never such intense in my life as in this action learning course. And what I have done here, perhaps you know the Bloom's taxonomy, 6 levels of learning objectives. I have added the 7th level, reflection. And when you compare this, so you have, they can grade from 1 to 5. And when you compare the results on the different levels, so in the first 3 levels, the results between the classical course and action learning course is quite similar. But here you see differences. So action learning is much more intense when you come to learning about analyzing situations, creating solutions, evaluating your own results, or especially reflecting about what you are doing. So you will also find a paper in the proceedings, and you will find this picture in the proceedings. I have tried to bring together these 3 levels of learning, or here I have named it thinking, so that's the learning in our head, ongoing learning cycle as discussed. So that's the learning cycle about the product we are producing, the result we are producing. It's similar. So the 4 aspects you have in the learning cycle for constructing new knowledge is quite similar with this learning cycle. And finally, you have the reflection cycle. This is important that you have also this level and that you combine these 3 levels. And I think action learning is an ideal combination of these 3 levels of learning. So I would like to conclude with some pictures again. So what is action learning? Action learning is a real problem. It's a group of students who are motivated, but they are, if the problem is real, I can tell you. What is important, that you have a learning environment that is not a classical classroom, but you have to be able to arrange a kind of creative situation, creative space, where they can draw and also model things. And a teacher as a coach, so you have to change your role, definitely, and you have to have a kind of a process, and in this process, first it's important to explore the situation. It's more than problem-based learning when you start with a problem. Here you first start with the situation where you have to analyze the problem. Did you see, did you understand the situation and the problem? And then defining the context. It's important that the students are defining this situation, this context, discussing ideas, creating artifacts for communication, collaboration, getting user feedback, learning and improving, and lots of reflection. So we often discuss also in class, so every week they are making so-called elevator pitches, really short pitches where they tell about the state of their work, and one important part is also a reflection part where they reflect about their doing. So I've started with pictures from Switzerland, so I would like to end with a quotation of, for me, a famous Swiss. I don't know how much he's known in the world. He was a philosopher, and he was a cognitive psychologist, and he was the first one who brought me to the understanding of constructivism, and that's, I think, an important thing we can learn from him. So, as I understand, now is the room for all your questions for all the different speakers of this morning. And so I don't know who is moderating the discussion.